So yeah, Max E.
Hey, thanks, Rebecca. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning to all of them who are here, and thanks for coming. I appreciate the fact that now we have opened up in Singapore and you are actually in this session. So hopefully with my over 20 years of supply chain experience, I can share something that is useful and relevant, especially if you are working along this line, right? So very nice to see you. My name is Max again, and I'm the founder for SCMI Group. We are a boutique firm that specializes in supply chain management consulting. So basically, what is supply chain and what are the post-pandemic implications, and what are some of the things that we need to take note of? So these are the items that I'd like to cover for tonight. So thanks again, Rebecca, and the team from Exprenio, Patty, Breslin. Thank you for inviting me for this session. So to make it easy, I like to simply start with a story, right? What toilet paper can teach us about supply chain. And if you remember last year, from Tokyo to Hong Kong, right, from Singapore to Australia, there are pictures of empty shelves. People simply just whack every rolls of toilet paper they can find at the supermarket. And this is quite interesting because we seldom see this phenomena, right? And we thought that, hey, toilet paper is such a low-cost item. It should be easily available. So why are these kind of things happening, right? So let's look at toilet paper. What is so special about this product and the supply chain? In supply chain, we look at items that usually we look at this criteria like first, demand, right? Is it stable or is it volatile? So volatile items normally have a seasonal patterns to it. Like for example, winter clothing. You will have a quite volatile demand because in summer, people don't really buy winter clothing, but when it's coming to fall, we will go and get it. Toilet paper is something, is what we call necessity. So the demand, it should be quite stable, right? The other thing is it has low value density, meaning to say the price of the item, right, per kilogram or per cubic meters is actually relatively low compared to things like electronics that high value, or pharmaceuticals, high unit value density. The third observation is that there's actually high variety, right? In the supermarket, you can find, although toilet paper is very, very simple item, you can find different configurations, different packaging, right? 2-ply, 3-ply, premium, or standard. So that actually adds slightly a little bit challenging situations to the supply chain of toilet paper, right? So what's the big deal? When we have an ad hoc event that's unexpected, all right, or what we call black swan, what the implications for supply chain is that the production and processing is actually designed for a stable supply chain. Now imagine suddenly there is a huge surge in the demand. The production and processing capability cannot be reconfigured very quickly, right? It takes time to build a factory. So what happened is that suddenly the supply chain is no longer having a stable demand, but actually a very volatile and increasing demand. Next, low value density. Now the problem is that this item, because it's low price per kilo, right? It cannot be economically transported over long distance. It definitely doesn't make sense to send by air shipment, right? So you go by ocean freight, maybe by trucking. And therefore, when we look at the global economy now, the supply chain is quite dispersed in the sense that there are certain areas, high production, and certain areas like Singapore is high demand. But the production is actually concentrated in usually locally, right? So even if there are some places with excess capacity, right, there's a problem of transporting it to a further away destination market, even though the market can bear higher prices. The other problem with high variety is what we call the different lot size, right? You can have maybe 6 rows, 12 rows, 18 rows, and so on, different packaging. And actually changing this packaging can also mean changes to the production capacity, and therefore add some complexity. Therefore, with this toilet paper lesson, right, what we like to highlight is actually the concept of the buoy effect. Now, for those of you who watched the movie Indiana Jones, you will know that this character has two weapons. One is the pistol, right? And the other one, which he probably used more often, is the whip, right? So when we look at the whip, a small change at the origin, right, a small angle change actually results in a very big change in the angle of the end of the whip. So this concept was coined by MIT, right, to represent that in a typical supply chain, right, it starts from upstream, the production, right? There we have the supplier, then it goes down to the middlemen, which are the distributors, the wholesalers, and then finally to the retailers, right, and the end consumers. So what it means is that a small spike in the final demand, when everybody is rushing to the supermarket store and trying to grab things, right, it will actually have a ripple effect all the way upstream across the supply chain, right? So when the supplier aggregate all the demand from the end demand, all right, end consumers, right, all the way, because the wholesaler will mark up a little bit, and the distributor will mark up the demand a little bit. So what the supplier see, right, when the orders come to him, is actually even inflated picture of the end demand, right? This is what we call the buoy effect in supply chain terminology, which is very common. And so this actually has a reinforcing loop in the sense that when there is a panic buying, right, it cascades through the supply chain, and the final production, right, the producer will actually see a very inflated picture. They'll try to ramp up capacity, just like face masks, right? Just like face masks, just like N95, just like all those PPE. However, this process actually takes time, right? And when they ramp up the demand, right, ramp up the production capacity, the demand would have changed. And this is a common problem facing across different products. So the next question is, why don't we increase inventory, right? We can actually stock up. So the problem is, as you know, nobody has a crystal ball. And in supply chain management, a lot of times professionals rely on forecasting, right? So even for forecasting, it is usually not accurate. As you can see from this diagram, yes, we can say that we try to stock up a lot of toilet paper in this case, right? But the problem of high inventory level, there are issues like, for example, where are we going to store the space, right? And then next, there is going to be a holding cost, because when you store items, you need to procure them, and there is a financing cost. So what you see in this picture is that the high inventory level is like a high water level, all right? It prevents the vessel from knocking the rocks below. But these rocks actually are representing the supply chain problems if you have too much inventory. So when the water level goes down, the vessel will actually hit those rocks, right? So having surplus inventory, especially excessive surplus, is actually not an advisable thing, right? Now, we come to this supply chain trilemma. I'm not sure how many of you actually are in the cryptocurrency space, right? Maybe you have bought Bitcoin, Ethereum, and the founder of Ethereum actually said in blockchain, there's a trilemma, right? You have three constraints, which is the scalability, all right? One of the issue, and you have security, and also you have decentralization. It's not possible to have all three optimized. You can have the best of two. So in supply chain trilemma, it's actually the same thing, right? Those who are in consulting business or in sales, you will know that usually this is also true for them. You can have three constraints, right? Time, cost, quality, right? CTQ. You can have two, but it is typically very difficult to optimize all three, all right, at one point in time. So what do I mean by that, right? Let's say we can have a cost-effective and high quality, right? But because we try to have a very cheap mode of transportation, right? So we need to consolidate goods. Therefore, it takes a long time for the items to reach to go from origin to destination. It takes a long time, right? So time is compromised in this case. Now, let's say on the other hand, the Japanese supply chain, they are very fast, right? Just in time, GIT delivery. So yes, it's timely, right? High quality, but it may not be cost effective because you are using a fast mode of transportation like air shipments, or maybe you, instead of one truckload to NTUC store, you actually have 3 runs a day, right? So that actually increases the cost because I may be using multiple truck trips, and each time the shipment is actually not a full truckload compared to let's say using a big truck and the truck is actually a full load compartment. So these are some of the factors supply chain generally face, professionals face when they try to look at how can I optimize all the 3 factors at the same time. And making a decision, sometimes I may have to prioritize 2 out of 3 factors. So with that basic understanding, right, and the toilet roll lesson, now let's look at the pandemic, right, and also post-pandemic environment, some of the trends and insights to kind of prepare us better for the next stage. Now, we can actually discuss, 20, 30 over trends, and there's so many different things. You have the trade war, you have the crude oil price that went to negative last April and May session. So I've just highlighted some perhaps more relevant with certain impacts, different time frames. Some are short to medium term, some are actually long-term implications. So I highlighted 5 over here. The first one is about the international maritime, especially the ocean freight. The second one is the e-commerce, right, which I think is a very noticeable change, a paradigm shift, but it's accelerated by the pandemic. Number 3 is one of the very important emerging corridor that started in 2013. And this is what we call the Belt and Road, or more commonly, One Road, One Belt. 4th is layman term 3D printing, right? But in professional term, it's called additive manufacturing. And finally, we have Industry 5.0. I have actually put down the implications on the 3 constraints. So some of the trends can affect actually higher costs, right? Some actually affect lower time, right? Some simultaneously affect all the 3 factors, like Industry 4.0. So as for the impact and the implications, you may agree or disagree, right? Because even let's say short term, maybe longer time, but long term, it could be shorter time. So there's also a time factor, the time frame. So let us go to the first one, international maritime ocean freight costs. For those of you who are involved in international shipping, right, you will be very cognizant about this fact, right? Starting from the pandemic last year, the ocean freight means the cost of shipping 140-footer container, right, from one point to the other point, has dramatically changed to unseen levels before. Right now, this is not common in a 12-month period. This is actually not very common. We don't really see such kind of pattern from, a very common route, let's say Shanghai to Rotterdam, used to be 1,000 plus, and it's talking about USD, right, for 140-foot container, up to nearly 7-8 times, right? That is crossing 9,000, 10,000. And actually, if we look at recent months, 2021, it is actually even higher. So if we look at the specific routes, right, the latest information I checked was that for the first route, Shanghai to Rotterdam, now is actually more than 13,000 for 140-foot container, right? And if we look at the last column, annual change is actually 664%. That's about 7 times higher, right? I would say that this has kind of never really happened before. Rotterdam to Shanghai, right, on the other way round is actually much cheaper, right? Now for this we have to explain the supply chain. Normally when we send something, whether it's by road, by plane, by vessel, there's always what we call the demand supply imbalance and empty return haul, right? So you will know that China is a big manufacturing hub, therefore it has a lot more things to send to other destination markets. But in return, right, the vessel may travel half empty. Okay, therefore you can see that from Rotterdam to Shanghai is actually much cheaper, right? Because there's not much things simply to come back to China. And you can see Shanghai to other places, Italy to US, right? The price basically from China to the destination country is much more higher. You look at the 1 year change, it's actually hundreds of percentage jump. So this is going to be a huge problem because for a lot of shippers, right, they cannot get enough vessel space. They cannot book vessel in advance. Therefore, they find it very hard to fulfill their contractual terms, right? For example, if there is a late delivery penalty, right, then they'll be penalized, but it's outside of their control. There's also very frequent complaints about containers, right? They couldn't find containers because all these things are held up by the vessels. And this is a very common problem that actually at the individual and company level is very hard to resolve until we see the buoy effect kind of subside, right? Now, what do I mean by that? If you remember, China only came back online, all right, full force in terms of production and exports, mainly because of face masks, because of the ventilation machines, right? They came in full force online in June, starting June 2020, right? And remember, we talked about buoy effect. So for the past few months in March, April, May, June, there's a lot of so-called stoppage of production because workers were sent back home. All right, there's no production, they couldn't find drivers. So until June, when everything comes back full force, right, there's a lot of catch-up. And therefore, you see from July onwards, the ocean freight costs actually start to climb up, right? And if we look at air freight, right, which I did not include here, air freight is actually worse, right? Because there's a lot of the equipment, medical equipment that needs to be shipped by air freight. So that kind of reached equilibrium point in December. However, although there was a short respite, right, but this year again, it comes at the end of April, the prices of ocean freight again start to shoot up, right? And I think generally for a good reason, because normally for summer, right, when it comes to summer, fall season, there's a lot of demand, right? Economic activity picks up. So the question is, will we see some kind of stabilization towards year end? Probably so, right? And then what happens next year? Well, that's difficult to project at this point. So high ocean freight costs, all right, in fact, high transport costs is one common problem. Second problem is actually the trend, e-commerce versus retail, traditional retail. Now, looking at the 10Q, which is actually the quarterly report of these companies, right? The 10Q and the 10K report in the US stock markets. I just placed Amazon and Walmart, right? Now, these are not the latest figure. I have not went in to do the latest update, but you can see from here, the Walmart, right? The Walmart, although they have bigger revenue, but actually the profits is lower, right? Amazon, half the revenue, but the profit is actually double, right? And if you look at the breakdown year by year, right, at the revenue and profit growth, basically Walmart has hit a stagnation, right? But Amazon is actually increasing a lot. But of course, we can say that it's because of AWS growth, which accounts for, I think, 40% of the revenue. But no doubt, e-commerce is actually eating everybody's lunch. Now, have you ever wondered, for e-commerce, why is that the National Post Service, SingPost in this case, in Singapore Post, SingPost or other postage companies across the different nations, why were they not actually well positioned to capture the e-commerce trend, right? Because if you look at them, they have a largest fleet of trucks, right? They have the distribution centers, right? They are in touch with a lot of this kind of B2C deliveries. So it's actually very strange. But the underlying reason, if we think deeper, is that actually there are three disconnects, right? The service disconnect, the operation disconnect, and the information disconnect, right? Now, what happened is that for postage service, right, typically they do not guarantee for their services unless you go for the premium things like guaranteed mail. Okay. Now, for this kind of e-commerce deliveries where you need to have, let's say, Prime, right, on the day delivery, or even 2 hours, want it now, straight away. Postage actually has a very big problem of satisfying that kind of very rapid delivery, right? And in a way, it's because their model is using hub and spoke, right? Which means to say that, in fact, it is not a point-to-point delivery, but all the letters, puzzles, the boxes, right, is collected from different locations or different outlets, right? and then they are centralized in one giant sorting center, right? In Singapore, it's Paya Lebar, right? And actually, this kind of hub and spoke, although it's cost effective, but it is actually adding a layer of time, right? And we have information disconnect also, right? So what it means is that usually the postage service do not tell you the real-time location, right? They only tell you the location when it passes through certain checkpoints, like it comes to a seaport, it comes to an inland post service, and so on. It's not really real-time. It's the same for DHL actually and FedEx. You don't really have real-time status, right? So for those of you who are looking at competing in the e-commerce market, you can actually look at the 5S framework, right? For e-commerce, oh, sorry, let me clarify. When I say e-commerce, we are referring to the e-commerce last mile delivery, right? Like in Singapore, you see Ninja Van, Gogo Van, and so on, right? We are talking about an e-commerce last mile delivery. We are not talking about an e-commerce marketplace, right, like Amazon. So let me clarify that. So this e-commerce last mile delivery, actually they compete on the 5S, basically savings, speed, search, selection, services, right? Now, these speed savings services, I just want to kind of maybe highlight one very important competitive advantage here, right? Which is the one below on the value-added services, right? To be a very competent e-commerce last mile delivery company, basically there are a few things. First, you must have the reverse logistics capability, right? So, for example, if let's say we send a shoe, right, a garment, and the customer do not like it, what happens when we deal with returns? All right. Now, dealing with returns is actually very expensive. The other one is the cash management. How do we manage cash? In Singapore, it's highly digitized. In China, it is also. But in a lot of other countries, actually handling cash is a necessity, right? A competitive advantage, especially in places where, like India, for example, right? They like to pay cash on delivery, COD terms. So these are some of the very important value-added services, and therefore, this is where the e-commerce player comes in to provide that kind of gap. Next one, we talk about the Belt and Road Initiative, right? BRI. That started in September 2013, when the Chinese President Xi actually gave a speech in Astana, right? Which was the former capital city of Kazakhstan, but now it's called Nur-Sultan. And basically, he talked about this concept of one belt, one road. So this is one of the major international reshaping of the economic corridors, right? So if we look at what is the one belt and what is the one road, basically the one belt refers to the line in red color, right? What it does is try to connect the Eurasian continent on the east flank and the west flank, right? Across land and not across ocean, right? Across land. Because if you look at the red line, let's say compared to the blue line is actually the maritime route, right? The sea route. So which one is shorter? Of course, it's the red line, right? So in terms of red line, if it's shorter, technically, right, the transportation should be cheaper, right? And it's actually less risk prone. Like for example, you don't have a ship stuck at the Suez Canal and then pull back everybody, right? So basically, this is the one belt and one road. Although it's called one belt and one road, the China priority is actually the belt, right, which is the Eurasian land continent. Now, there are actually geopolitical considerations. There are the energy considerations, but we are not talking about that. That will be a topic for another day, right? So we are talking about the supply chain, strictly supply chain. And I just want to highlight this thing called the Eurasian Container Express Train, right? Now, China has the technology to implement rail transport, right? For ferrying of passengers, it can go up to 350 kilometers per hour, right? 350 kilometers per hour, that's very, very fast. But of course, they tone it down to 200 or even lower for city considerations. Now, for freight trains, Container Express train from Chongqing, which is one of the northwestern major city, right? It's a direct municipal city. From Chongqing, to Duisburg in Germany. Basically, there is one convoy of 46 40-footer containers, right, on trains, and across a distance of about 12,000 kilometers, right, passing through 5 to 6 countries. And when it passed through the borders, actually it doesn't really stop. So this is something like they created a VIP channel access, right, for the train to go through with very minimum customs. So for that distance, it can actually hit from origin to destination 12 days, right? So if you look at this, basically what we are saying is that one day you travel 1,000 kilometers on average, right? And the cost is overall is about 9,600 USD, okay? And that's before the COVID-19. Now, the positioning of this corridor is, in this case, right, is that it is a transport mode that is cheaper than air, right? Because if you fly this distance by air, it's going to be $8, $9, $10 per kilogram, much more expensive, but it's faster than ocean, right? Let's say from Shanghai to Rotterdam, right? It may take 30 days to 45 days, right, across the sea route through the Suez Canal. But for this case, you are actually about 3 to 4 times faster, right? So imagine those items where the holding cost of the inventory is very expensive, which means to say you want to be fast, sell it fast to the market, or it's perishable. You cannot, too long in the transportation. Instead of spending 45 days at sea, you can reach the market 12 days, right? So if you have competing brands, one go by this method, you can actually reach the shelf faster than your competitor. What we are concerned actually is that when this plan come out, if this plan is successful, then what about the position of Singapore? Is it going to be compromised? Because we are actually the international maritime hub, right? One of the key centers. But if everything goes by land, there's no role for us to play. So there's actually a so-called mitigation strategy. Our government is quite proactive in the sense that this China-Singapore Connectivity Initiative, right, is actually the third G2G project after Suzhou and Tianjin, right? And there's actually a Singapore base now in Chongqing, right, setting up a transport and logistics center, right, multimodal, that will serve a railway, road, and inland waterways. Because Chongqing actually there are two main rivers, Jialinjiang and Changjiang, right? So they actually connect very well by these three modes. And when we have a base there, we can actually use that container express train to send things to Europe, all right? But then the next question is that, so what about from Singapore to Chongqing, right? It's not an easy route also. That now is actually covered by trucking, right? There are actually Singapore companies who are sending goods not only by sea, but also by trucking, right? So it will go across Malaysia, Thailand to Indo-China region, and then it cuts across to Chongqing. So there are now all these international transport routes that are coming up to serve connectivity in the region. Next one, let me discuss a little bit about additive manufacturing. All right. Now, from you heard about a lot about 3D printing. Actually, this technology 10 years ago there was a lot of hype, all right, and a lot of money goes into 3D printing companies. But then again, if you look at the share prices for a lot of these 3D companies, it went up, right? Came down a lot, like Bitcoin, right? And now it's coming back again, right? Mainly because Katie Woods, some of her ETF actually consists of this 3D printing, and she herself believes that it's going to transform the industry, right? So as you can see here, even things like Apple supply chain and so on, right, could be done by 3D printing. Let me give you one example over here. We're using the printed circuit board, all right, PCB as one example. Now, in PCB industry, when we talk about from concept to commercialization, right? So you need to design, then prototype, testing, tooling, and then you go into production. The whole thing can take actually months, right? Can take months. But with 3D printing, right? Let's say a solution by nano dimension. But let me throw in a disclaimer. This is for education only. It's not investment advice. But if you are interested, you can actually go to this public listed company in the US and read up their slides, right? Usually that's what I do. For crypto investment, we read white papers. For public companies, we read the 10K and the 10Q reports. You can actually learn a lot from this information. So that supply chain time is now actually is compressed significantly, right? And why is this so? Is because if we look at the supply chain for PCB, typically it takes weeks or months. It's because the US or the Europe come up with a design, right? Then they send to China, right, to produce a prototype, right? And they have to wait 7 to 21 days, and then they receive the prototype, and then they commission the production. So it is actually very, very time consuming, all right? And it's not efficient, as you can see. So what 3D printing promises is that I can actually bring all this prototyping, right, testing, piloting nearer back to home, right? And this is actually especially important in view of the trade war, where we talk about, the US talk about inshoring, nearshoring instead of outsourcing, right? So they're talking about inshoring, nearshoring, and this allows them to bring back parts of the supply chain back home, or at least nearer to home. And that is why previously the former American president, Donald Trump, has always hammered Apple, right? To why don't you relocate your base back to US? We give you incentive, we give you tax breaks. But Tim Cook, the CEO, actually mentioned that I can bring back, right? But the problem is the supply chain turnaround time. In China, right, we can have a new product to test launch, and they can simply wake up thousands of workers in the middle of the night and go into the production line. So that's the thing that is competition on the time itself. Next, we have Industry 4.0, right? Now, this term Industry 4.0 is actually a coined term by German scientists, supply chain professionals, right, academicians, and economic experts. So when they say Industry 4.0, basically there were so-called a few stages of industrialization over the past 200 years before, right? 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, and now 4.0. So basically, they were saying that in the past, things were so-called batch manufacturing, and there's a lot of requirement for labor, raw materials, right? Production is very slow. And now, Industry 4.0, the major change is that the concept is what we call smart manufacturing, right? We want to do things intelligently by letting all the smart devices be interconnected, right? So that human interference is very, very minimal, right? Or completely absent. And a lot of things can actually go by itself, right? Whether we are talking about big data analysis, we talk about additive manufacturing, right? So IBM, they have actually explained about this Industry 4.0. And one of the key words I'd like to highlight is the Internet of Things, right? IoT. So this Internet of Things is actually a device-to-device or machine-to-machine communication, right? And this communication happens when, like, for example, let's say in the field of telematics, when I have a cold chain, right? I want to deliver this product across from origin to destination, right? In the past, I remember what I do when I work in a transport firm is that we have to install some kind of a data reader, right? That can measure the changes in the temperature fluctuations. That means it has a digital thermometer. It can actually capture the temperature, right, at regular intervals. We can set 10 minutes or 30 minutes. And when the truck reaches the destination, we will take that data logger and then download the information into Excel, right? So we can observe the pattern. But this is a problem because in a typical supply chain, right, you actually have this problem of what happens if the door is not locked properly, right? Then you have the problem happening, and you only correct the problem. You don't really do it real time to correct the problem, right? You only react to the problem. So IoT, for example, can actually so-called arrest this problem by giving you real-time information, right? So yes, Rebecca, I received your message. Thanks for the reminder. I will try to wrap up in 5 minutes time, right? So I'm coming to the conclusion part, right? Blockchain plus supply chain is another one of my favorite topics. And I'm not sure any of you have done a blockchain. This morning, Paddy has conducted a talk, and I was quite interested. It was very interesting because there was actually some blockchain projects. But basically what it says is that if let's say we want some trust in the product, when we say it's organic or when we say it's authentic, right? How can we actually be sure? There's no way to do it now, but in future, right? If we scan a QR code, and because all this data from the farm to the fork is put on a blockchain that's immutable, right? You cannot change the data. Then when you scan the QR code, we can actually verify. So one of the projects here, VE Chain, right? The symbol is VET. It's a very interesting project because it allows this concept of blockchain plus supply chain, right, in terms of different use cases to be implemented. All right. So now planning ahead, I just have this maybe a few points, right, that you can see. But basically, what I like to highlight is that the last point itself, right? Now, because of all these supply chain disruptions and ongoing trade war, chip war, oil war, whatever war, Southeast Asia. I'm not sure. Most of you, I believe, are in this region, right? Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand, Southeast Asia. So actually, Southeast Asia is an attractive region for foreign direct investment and also mergers and acquisitions. Because if you see, there's a lot of money, institutional money coming from China, from Japan, right? Coming here for M&A. I work in the supply chain, so when I deal with logistics companies, right? Actually, there are certain deals going on, right? A few years back, it was CWT, one of the biggest, 1.2 billion, right? Unfortunately, their purchaser now is in a problem, right? So, if you are in this area, right, strike valuable partnerships, regional outlook, and who knows, maybe there will be a very attractive valuation one day. And when it comes to the table, right, for equity injection or debt financing or whatever, then you can contact Blackstorm, right, for their advice because they are the best gurus in this area. One last part is that if anybody is interested, right, after this session, right, in future, feel free to contact me. I specialize in these few areas: enterprise supply chain automation optimization. So if your company is in seek of some supply chain reorganization improvement, right, especially with government grants like from Enterprise Singapore, that's what we do, right? That's for enterprise. Number two, if you are in the area of supply chain and you're looking for equity injection, debt financing, M&A, there's also another thing that we can offer some advice. If you'd like to expand your business in the Belt and Road countries, especially Central Asia, where I spend most of my time actually before COVID-19, yes, we can have a talk, right? Any chartering arrangement of aircraft, freighters to fly things, and also, let's say, any capacity building programs for your company or for yourself, right? So with that, I'd like to end over here and let Rebecca take over. And also, I'll be here for any Q&A, all right? So with that, I really like to wish you a very good evening and forge your own path. And who knows, the destination, there may be a pot of rainbow, right? At the end of rainbow, there may be a pot of gold waiting for you. So with that, thank you very much. I shall hand back to Rebecca now. Rebecca, please.
All right. Thank you so much, Max, for all the information. I'm actually quite impressed with all the insights that I've gotten today. And now we will open to the floor for our Q&A session right now. So while the rest are, typing away their questions in the chat box, I have some questions on hand to kickstart first. All right. So it's more leaning towards China and supply chain as well as exporting. So do you think that because I saw that you actually share like the Road and Belt initiative and stuff like that, so do you think that China will actually continue to remain the world's leading exporter as this pandemic continues, and what could possibly cause China to be otherwise based on your experience?
Wow, that was a very good question, Rebecca. And it's actually a topic for master level thesis.
Oh, okay.
Yes. Now, China is actually having a major paradigm shift. If you look at the international export and import data, right, you notice that the trend of increasing imports, right, although export is increasing, but the rate of import actually is accelerating. And after the global financial crisis, that was GFC in 2008, right? Mm-hmm. Actually, there's a lot of scholars and even some policymakers saying that China should have a more of an import-oriented strategy. That means to stimulate domestic demand. Because for too long, they have been relying on, one of the engine of growth is exports, right? And obviously this is not sustainable, all right? And you have to compress your local currency to do that. So in view of this, actually now China is having a rethinking, and that's why we see increasing spending power, right? I don't know what we can actually send to China, right? But I think there is a few categories of goods, especially baby food, dairy products. These are the things that they always go crazy about, besides the LV bags, right? Which the Chinese are also swiping up, right? So with that, we should take advantage of the China ASEAN or China Singapore FTA, right? Actually, China ASEAN already has a FTA, free trade area agreement, started in January 2010, right? So which means to say that a lot of things that enter China is so-called zero-rated import duties, right? Now, whether that means totally efficient depends, because if we talk about going to Shanghai or Guangzhou, drop the things, it is very easy. But if we talk about inland transportation to, let's say, a place like Urumqi, that's 4,000 over kilometers inland, then the inland transport cost is quite significant, right? What I would suggest is actually go with that Chongqing platform, right? Or relocate to certain things, or have a presence in China directly, rather than just supplying. Because if they are going for domestic demand stimulation, right, sooner or later, right, regardless of WTO, there would be certain maybe import substitution requirements, which means that you need to have local content manufacturing, right? Unless you are big boys like Tesla, you can muscle your way through.
I see.
Hope I answered your question.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for answering my question. All right, now I will give the rest a chance to, ask their questions away. All right. Feel free to, if you are too shy to switch on your camera and your mic, you can always, type in the chat box and ask Max if you have any questions.
Also, I'd like to share, I'm not sure most of you, whether you are studying supply chain management now as a subject in school, or whether you are working in this line. When I first started 1990s and late 1990s, right? So you can guess my age. Upon graduation, my honors thesis was actually in a warehouse. So talking about computer simulation for warehouse operations. And the company was happy with my work doing the computer simulation modeling, and they offered me a job. But 3 days after examination, I had to report to work instead of traveling to Europe, like I think some of you guys, girls, do after graduation. But then, because financially not so well, so need to work very quickly. I told my parents, "Hey, ma, I got a job. Hey, good. Where? Oh, in this XXX company. Oh, what is it? Logistics. Drive for leave. So that was an impression then. When we talk about supply chain, transportation, logistics, warehousing, right? But I do see a number of females here. The thing is, it's actually changing now. This industry has a very, actually, you need certain IT background, for example, understanding. You need to be very multifaceted, and it's not really a forklift or driver kind of job anymore. If you look at logistics, right, it's actually a sunrise industry. When certain industry probably is pendaki already but for this industry, it's still at the very beginning, especially if you want to venture into, let's say, e-commerce, last mile delivery. So for those of you who would like to have more information about the training, right, that's where we can actually organize, and I can refer you to the website like Singapore Logistics Association, and you see the logo behind my back. There's actually a comprehensive training. Thanks.
I see. Well, surprisingly, my times, right, supply chain is actually a very hot topic that a lot of people would like to get into. Yeah, they say that's where it's a booming industry or booming sector to be in. And like during your days, maybe a lot more guys would be want to get involved. But during my times, especially, I think you can see from the crowd, lots of ladies are getting more interested in this space. Yeah. So I have another question, because since we are talking about trends and challenges in supply chain in Asia, right? So do you view that Asia as one of the most important areas for, increasing investment and new businesses especially in this industrial area, and why do you think so?
Well, Asia is actually very fragmented in a sense that we probably have a few blocks, right? BLOCS, Southeast Asia, we have South Asia, we have East Asia, we also have Middle East, and then Central Asia. So there are so many different blocks. I would say that overall, the common denominator is that countries want to move things fast, and people want to receive things fast, right? So it is actually a critical part, but more often than not, it is a problem of man-made barriers, right? Like if you send things to Vietnam, their customs regimes are sometimes a little bit strict on certain things, right? Very minor things, the whole cargo got detained. So there are different practices, but I think it's not the geographical distance, but it's the economic distance that's lengthened because of human man-made practices. And if you know certain best practices, or if you know certain best way of doing this, actually that helps to shorten the time, reduce the cost. And that's why I think our government is so interested about setting a base in Chongqing, right? And in fact, not only that, PSA also have port benches in so many different parts of the world, right? Because they want to have a gateway, an important node for this global supply chain. Back in Southeast Asia, definitely it's going to be very interesting for you. If you look at the multiples for local public listed companies, right? They are in logistics business. The valuation is about 6 to 8 times, right? Multiples. But if you are in the e-commerce last mile delivery, right, in Southeast Asia, it can go up to 20, 30 times, right? Like Malaysia, GDAX, right? And okay, we don't need to talk about all those China one, that one even crazier. Catalyst bot can be 100 times multiples. So again, this is where Blackstone, if you look at the multiples, right, you probably know even in this sunrise industry, there are certain areas that are more shining brightly, right? Can I look at Ivan's question?
Sure.
The negative comments on the BRI. Yeah, Ivan, would you like to kind of tell me your context or maybe your concerns? Because it seems that maybe you have a personal opinion about this. So I would love to really hear from you first. If it's convenient. If not, it's okay, right? Now, just tell me whether it makes sense. The BRI, again, usually I try to avoid sensitive topics, but in this case, yes, I guess you're referring to that famous airport, and then there are a few others. So what we call the debt trapping, right? This is an area where we are going into politics, right? I have to concur, right? Again, please quote. Oh, this is being recorded now. There is a political agenda. It cannot be totally politically neutral. So if you look at actually the global powers now, right, in terms of, let's say the superpower, the superpower nation, right, there are two fundamental pillars to that superpower status. One is US dollar currency, the other one is the naval power. So if you look at this Belt and Road, right, the one Belt One Road, which one did I say is more important? Is the Eurasian continental, the route, the land route. Why is it the land route? So now you can see, right? And furthermore, I think importantly is because of energy, right? One of the 6 corridors in Belt and Road actually cuts through a friendly country, right? And they can move oil without going through the Straits of Malacca, right? So yes, there is a political, I think these are the negative things by saying it's debt trapping and so on. But on the other hand, if let's say there's no such FDI, the country probably cannot go to capital markets and raise funds to build the infrastructure, right? So, frankly speaking, nobody is pointing a gun at the minister's head and say that you must sign this agreement, right? It's really up to the policymakers in that country to decide whether this is part of their good for the nation. right? So I guess there's no right or wrong. This is a very good question. I deserve further study, right? But I can agree with your position. So hopefully I answered that, right? And no, why would you say sorry? I mean, it's an important topic. So Clarice, thanks for this question. Sustainable supply chain, so is critical to the future. Sustainable supply chain, this is a very important topic, right? Of consumer products, especially in this time of now. If you're in Singapore, do you find that recently the weather has become a little bit topsy-turvy? Or maybe for the whole of this year. Last year, when you look at the rainfall in Singapore, right, I think it's 200 over. On the average, if you look at the past years, right, it's never such a heavy rainfall. This year also very topsy-turvy. Why is this important? I think long term, if we have children, right, even though maybe not our age, but I think for the next generation, they're really going to have a problem of climate change, right? And then the second part is that currently the whole supply chain is designed to still, there's a lot of waste, right? Like if you look at how your electronics are shipped, right? You can see the boxes are getting smaller and smaller because in the past, right? Let's say the iPhone box is so big, right? And now do you realize that they do? If you buy the latest iPhone, they don't even send you the cables. They actually strip a lot of things, right? You just get a phone, and it's a very compact packaging. So all these things actually, in a way, they are wary, all right? Companies or politicians, they are knowledgeable about, the need to reduce this carbon footprint. So this area on supply chain sustainability is actually going to be a very big topic, right? But coming back to this question, pandemic, right? Perhaps we have to make an exception that there's a lot of plastic containers, there's a lot of plastic waste generated because you are buying food, you're not eating outside, right? And if you, again, this one, I don't want to create a division of camp, but it is, I think it's necessary, right? The lives and the proper hygiene practices. So it is actually necessary. But long term, we have to go back to waste where there's actually now technology of creating some kind of seaweed, right? You can make into plastic that's good enough to store items for 6 to 8 weeks, right? Biodegradable some more. So long term, we really have to look at, and that's definitely a very interesting field, and you probably can attract a lot of foreign funding or venture funding if you are able to improve green supply chain or better packaging, right?
All right. We have some time for one last question. Okay. If we do not have any more questions, all right, and if you do, still have like your unanswered burning questions in mind, you can actually reach out to Max, okay, via Ask Experts Anything over here. So I have listed some links whereby you can connect with us and find more information. Okay.
So thank you, Rebecca. Thanks to the Backstorm team, Patty, Jocelyn, for the opportunity, and take care.
Yeah, thanks, Max, for taking the time out and share with us so much insights. All right, so if you want to, connect with Max, you can just scan this QR code over here, a quick one. Of course, if you want to find out more about future events, you can connect with me on LinkedIn. All right.
For the PowerPoint slides, Rebecca,
Yep.
if let's say they request for it, I think
Some of
there
them
was a
yep.
request. Yeah. So feel free to disseminate.
Yep. Okay. Yep. So for the PowerPoint slides, right? I believe majority of you have already registered your email via Eventbrite. That's how you stumble upon this event. If you haven't done so, you can drop me. You can actually private message me your email address so that I can send you this recording as well as along with the PowerPoint slides for your own reference. Okay. So, stay tuned for future events. So our next upcoming event will be talking about will planning. Okay, what do you need to know about will planning? Something similar to, as in the concept is something similar to today's event. Of course, I have some of you are requesting for ESA. As of now, we do not provide any, but do, stay updated by following us on our social media to, find out which are the webinars or events that we will potentially provide ESAs in the future. Yep, I think that's all for today. And thank you so much for taking the time out on a Thursday evening. And also thank you, Max, for sharing with us